Welcome everyone to the second session of the Kubernetes and OpenStack for the interoperability, which we are doing under the CC ICI banner. Today we will talk about the CNI plugin drivers and the CSI. So let me recap what we did last week. Last week we discussed about the Kubernetes architecture. So this is a new diagram I have
Can
pulled
you
out.
increase your volume?
This is a new diagram I have pulled out. What it does is here is a user who is a client and on the dashboard or on the CLI trying to connect to the API server. The API server for Kubernetes has components like scheduler, controller, and the etcd key value store. The Kubernetes works through master or what we call as Kubernetes control plane and the worker nodes. So master node is the one which enables uh, or helps create the pods and manage the containers within them, as well the applications running within the containers through the kubelet and kube proxy. Kubelet is an agent sitting on every node. In fact, you can describe the node as kubelet itself because that is how it manages everything. So the API server has all the container orchestration APIs which are available for Kubernetes through the scheduler which schedules on the different nodes. So you can see here there are three worker nodes, one master node. One master node is not really production worthy. You need to have three if you want to do a HA capable master so that master failure is avoided. So Kubernetes control plane is what is reflected by the master node. Here I am taking a simplified view with the API server, API being called and asking the pods to be scheduled, and controller controls depends on the scope that is defined. That is the scopes of the controller. There are multiple controllers. This is controller of controller is the master controller. And some of the controller services are like we discussed last time, the deployment service, replication service, daemon set, stateful set. There are many. All those are services, and these services enable the uh, requirement of parts to attain a desired state. So there is something called desired state, and there is a current state, which is defined as status. So the way to manage the pods, which is the unit of scheduling in Kubernetes. Example, the unit of scheduling in VM world is VM, whether it is OpenStack or whether it is VMware for the on-prem. Same way, if you have a um, OS, then your unit is simply you run the application itself directly on the host. Whereas if you have a container, then Docker is, example, if you do a Docker based container, then the Docker engine composes and executes on the uh, host a container as a unit. But in Kubernetes, we don't talk Docker as the unit, but pod as the unit. Pod, like you have a whale. Whale is what describes the Kubernetes, the Docker, and you have pod of whales, and therefore Kubernetes is nothing but pod of whales means group of pods being together. And so we put group of pods as you see on the right side and the worker node. Worker node is equivalent in OpenStack terms a compute node where your computations happen. So, and they interface with the external world through kube proxy. Now, external world rather routes or attempts to access through kube proxy, which has an external interface called node port. So given a node, so we have to be very cautious when we say node. Node may mean a VM, node may mean a host, bare metal host. Therefore, when we talk about node, it is generic term for the server, which is what in OpenStack we call server. Server can be a VM or server can be a physical server. Same way here, node can be a VM, node can be a bare metal host or with a OSR, etc. So what I will say here, our goal is to ensure that we are talking about node, and node is understood to be a host of pods. So if you have multiple nodes, example here you can see worker node 1, 2, 3, each one has multiple pods. So let's go to the slide number 2. And what I want to emphasize here is that everybody needs a runtime interface. In the sense, Kubernetes runs containers. So there is something called runC, which is what you use to run the container. Now, because Kubernetes is an evolving piece, if you look to the right side of the diagram here, description of node has at least 3 pieces. One piece is the kubelet piece, which is the agent, which listens to the API server and responds to the API server. Because we saw in the last diagram, API server is the master of everybody. That is the Kubernetes control plane. So Kubernetes control plane talks to a node, a Kubernetes node, worker node through kubelet. The other 2 pieces which must exist on a either a on-prem bare metal or hosted, publicly hosted, hosted node where the Kubernetes is running, they need to have at least a container runtime interface, CRI, which can be managed by either a podman or it could be a cryo or containerd. So these are all the various uh, runtime interfaces that interact with the CRI or through the CRI. That is, the container runtime interface is the one which enables a node to be able to run the containers. So given a node means it can be a VM or a hosted on a public cloud or whatever. You have a Linux host, and that Linux host has a kubelet installed. If you need to run it as a worker node, it should have a CRI, and the third, it should have a network proxy, which is in this case, it's called kube proxy. So the main central piece is the CRI, container runtime interface. So if you come to the left side here, you can see a kubelet, which is here, has a gRPC client. gRPC is nothing but generic. It's a RPC, but a powerful RPC which is based on the proto buffer. So what happens is the RPC client, gRPC client running on a kubelet talks to a gRPC server. So the CRI shim is nothing but one of these, either it's a podman or it's a cryo or containerd. All of them, they do what? They wrap up the container runtime using the gRPC to run on them. So basically gRPC server is nothing but a daemon or a server as we call it. That's the one which runs the container runtime, and the container runtimes are provided by examples of these are this. So earlier Docker used to be run directly, even now it runs directly, but it is not native, but it runs through the CRI. So if you take a Docker engine and you run your Docker, that will be native interface for Docker. But if you bring that through containerd, it will be using the CRI interface. So basically, CRI interface controls many containers, as you can see. So how many containers are there per pod? There can be one container or many containers. There is no restriction on number of containers. In a given pod. But for all purposes, because they are co-scheduled, so if you have two containers within a pod, pod is the unit of scheduling. The scheduler in the control plane will schedule all the containers together. And they are, every pod has only one IP. So if you have more than one container in a pod, one normally we call it as the container, main container and support container. Sometimes support containers are also called as sidecars. That said, usually we expect one container per pod. So the scaling unit is always pod. So if I want to horizontally scale, let's say a web server is running in a container and I want to scale, I will not take another container within the pod. Rather, I'll create another pod and then have a web server on that. And then now we'll have two of them connected together so you can take the load. Of course, this is not imperatively done. It is all done descriptively. And that is where the description of the uh, app or the pod descriptor contains all the information about it. If you have one pod or multiple pod, and each pod has what is the desired uh, state and what is the current state and what is the namespace it is running in, etc., etc. So there are a minimum namespace and metadata, which may include annotation labels, and then the current state, which is the desired state, and the current state, which is the status. So scope, status, these are some of the minimum requirement. We'll go over it later, but to understand that a kubelet is nothing but has a gRPC client, and it has to have connection to the CRI to even talk to anything on the host. Therefore, it uses gRPC client, and the shim gRPC server shim is the one which talks to the container uh, uh, daemons. And the container daemons are some of them like Podman for pod manager, Cryo for generally public. This is the most popular. This is the one coming from Docker, and this is the one coming from Red Hat. So these are various variation, but most standard is being pushed towards Cryo these days. Okay. Having said that, let me come back to service to give some glimpse of what service is. So the node ports are generally associated with the kube proxy. So input, process, output. If you talk about the node, input is here, process is here, output is here. So when you talk about output, output is nothing but network has to expose the application, and it cannot expose it directly. It has to expose it through a concept called service. So what we will see is we will see two parts. One is the pod networking, another is service networking. Pod networking is only connecting pods, whereas service networking is one which is exposing the app, app which is run on inside the pod, inside the container, the application that is exposed through a port. Kubernetes manages only one cluster at a time. So when I say Kubernetes control plane, and if I am talking of one cluster, it is only managing one cluster. We are not talking of multi-cluster. Multi-cluster goes to the cluster API. That's not the part. We are only talking one cluster. And in that one cluster, there is a service that talks to the node port. And node port is the one where application is exposed. If you have three nodes, as we saw earlier, and if I am running an application in only one node and the node port is set 3500, let's assume some number. So IP colon 3500 is the port. So the port number is where it exposes. IP, whatever the node IP is, node has only one IP. So if you are three nodes and the pod is in the node one, and that is one which has got 2000, whether the pod runs in node one, node two, or node three, node port will always be same for a given service. So if I say 3500, 3500 is the port where that particular application can be accessed externally. But how? Not on that IP, because that IP is internal. So there is a cluster DNS which takes that port, and through the node port, it exposes to the service network. So let's clear out that there is something service network, which is at the top, pod network, which is at the bottom. So this is a multi-layer, no, multi-layer networking. So the service node is the one which directs anybody who wants to expose. Node port doesn't change. Whether node port is used in the pods network or service network, node port number remains same. So if I say 3500, it will be 3500. It will be same 3500 here in the node port. So, or alternately, you can map it, but generally it is same. So if a service is exposed, the pod is providing the service through the node port, and service network is in the top layer, and pod network is in the lower layer. So before we can explain this, I will get to the most important part is in this, we have to understand what is CRI. Once we are done with the CRI, then we have to talk about the CNI. So I will come back to this figure, but let's go further. So what we have to talk about now, what is CNI? CNI is a runtime, it's a network interface. Okay, CNI was not part of Kubernetes, but it was brought in, and now it's in the incubation. So what it means is the projects in uh, CNCF, which is the mother of Kubernetes, or Kubernetes was the first project under CNCF, which was graduated. So projects get incubated, projects come in as a sandbox projects, they get incubated, and then they get graduated. At this time, there are some uh, probably less than a dozen of graduated projects. The first project which was graduated was Kubernetes, and Kubernetes has a team called COP, which took the legacy code from, or not the legacy, but what I mean is in terms of today, 3 years back, it is still a legacy. The first codes which were developed by Google, which donated it, that was brought through the pod, and they are currently on 1.19 release. And 1.19 has, although being released, has some issues. So currently it is 1.18, which is stable. So there is a question of a release being stable and being in alpha or beta before it comes to general availability. 1.19 uh, is having issues. 1.91 will clear that, but it will be generally available uh, pretty much once it is stable. So at this time, 1.18 is the stable version you should go with. However, 1.19 is not far off. Given the Kubernetes, we are talking about the CNI. CNI did not come as native. It came from outside, but it is for the cloud native. So anything that we do through Kubernetes is cloud native. Applications written as microservices run in the containers within the pod. All of them are cloud native applications. They are microservices. So microservices, when they run inside the pod, they have to talk to the uh, either the pods within the same node or pods outside of their nodes. To do that, it has got some simple primitives like add, delete, CNI, and add, delete the plugin. So CNI has got a concept where it's a what do you call um, specification is there for that. So here you see the two diagrams. These are very similar. Why I drew this is to indicate that you have got a runtime, that is Kubernetes runtime. We call it CRI, let's say. So the CRI will invoke, offload its function for networking to CNI. And CNI have several plugins, and there are many plugins. They, if one of the plugins, whatever the plugin you take, that has that plugin will talk to the interface of the container pod, and then it will connect one another. So the plugins are important. If you have plugins, then you can actually execute the CNI. So let's come to what is the CNI, how does it work? Basic. So there are basic container plugins, network CNI plugins, as well as production plugins, which are third party like Calico, View, etc. If we take a uh, cluster, and if you use for on-prem use cases, obviously you need one IP per pod. So if I have, let's say, 256 or let's say 200 pods in a cluster, I need at least 200 IPs. So I'll allocate a slash 24 uh, IPv4, of course, IPs, which can be assigned within the cluster. If I want, let's say, a slash 16, I can have 64K uh, nodes within a worker node cluster. So container to container communication is inside a pod. What I mean is, if you inside a host, basically inside a node, not inside a pod, this should be inside a node. So okay, let me correct that later. But essentially, container to container communication inside a node is through the pod. And how do you do that? That is by invoking the CRI will, that is the container runtime, will invoke the container network and offload saying, hey, get me your pod and let us connect them. Then it can be a loopback. If you are on the single host, which is a loopback connection, you can use the standard host based interface, which is a loopback plugin. So there are many plugins. You can have a bridge plugin, which is layer 2 plugin. Mac VLAN, that is bit depending on, you can Mac layer VLAN plugin you can use, or you can use IPVLAN plugin, or you can use third-party plugins. So there are many plugins. Important part is CRI creates an isolated network entity called in the container called namespace, and namespace for the network namespace, network NS. That's the one which allows the pods to connect to each other, because pods know that if the namespace of the pod is, let's say, cluster 1, then cluster 1 is the namespace which is used by all the uh, pods within the container, and therefore they are able to connect it using the namespace. But if it is not in the namespace, it is outside the names, because you got two nodes now, and just local loopback will only allow it to have internal access. How about external access? So we need a routable pod. Basically, that means pods on a node 1 to pods on a node 2, they should be able to communicate. And that can be done at pure L3, uh, like at the IP address, so that if you know that entire cluster has a what do you call a slash 16, then I can pull out one subnet of slash 24 to each of the nodes, and so they will all be communicating to each other, because all of them are going to the cluster IP. Cluster IP is nothing but, if you have a slash 16, which is 64K, and then I'm going to divide it into 256 IPs per slash 24. All of them can be connected to one single IP. We can define, like if I say 192.168 dot 0.0 slash 16, then 192.168 0.1 can be the cluster IP. And all of them will talk to the cluster IP. And because they are able to talk to each other within that particular IP range, and that can also be enabled through IPAM plugin or IP address management, or through even VXLAN. So generally, all the container network have something called core DNS or cluster DNS, it is called now. That is nothing but an internal DNS which is focused on the IP resolution at the pod level. So if you have multiple nodes and if you have one core DNS, then that core DNS can communicate with, enable communication between different uh, different pods in different nodes for the same namespace. So the container runtime offloads the IP assignment to CNI, which connects to underlying configured plugin. Once IP address is given by the respective plugin, the CNI forwards it back to the requested container. So basically, CRI calls CNI, CNI calls plugin, plugin plugs in, has a IP address, can do any communication, and then once the results are it returns back to the runtime interface. Runtime interface then goes through the uh, uh, kubelet, which is the agent, and kubelet returns to the API for the job completion. So CNI container, it is important to note, there is a GitHub link here. You can go and see the specs for what is the CNI specs. The specs is very simple. It has got some add, delete type of commands. It also has, first you have to establish a CNI, and then you have to later add the plugin. And CNI is not an exclusive property of Kubernetes. It is used by Mesos, Cloud Foundry, Podman, Cryo, Containerd, several of the daemons and several of the application frameworks use CNI. Why this I am telling you is because from interoperability point of view, if I have to deal with Cloud Foundry and with OpenStack and also Kubernetes, I will definitely want the networking interoperability, and therefore CNI, CRI, CSI, all of these, the runtime interface, the networking interface, and the storage interface become important for interoperability sake, so that we can uh, have hybrid cloud environment interoperable. So the basic thing, it defines the execution flow of like add and delete of the plugins. So what are the plugins? So generally, if you look at the Linux, the opcni will have all the plugins stacked up. Then when you run the configuration, then HCCNI gets the create hccni.d slash whatever the name of that plugin plugs in there, and the configuration is available. And then you have something called kubectl, which is nothing but a utility, command line utility, which will manually you can use to test the CNI, so that you know that your Kubernetes CNI API are used. Instead of command line interface, the command line interface is for us to manually test it. That is imperatively doing anything we want. But if you look at Kubernetes CNI API, those are the ones which are descriptive, which can be used either as YAML or JSON based automation based on declaring the podnet, the API. And so the external API, which comes through the Kubernetes API we saw earlier, we can go back and check back what were we talking. So you can see here in the architecture, the API server, a command line interface either can be run through the kubelet, or you can have a utility called kubectl, and that can enable all this. So what does work through kubectl should normally work through API if they are all standard. So essentially what we have covered is the CNI part of it. I think that gives me CRI and CNI we have covered. And so what we can do is we can now move on to the CSI, I believe. And so I will see what do we have in this. That's the end of the part one. And let me do one thing at this time. I can uh, I can probably pause the record. So this is the part two of our today's presentation. This is Kubernetes storage. And important point here is that we need to focus here on what is the storage that we need to look at. Um, Here the, okay. So here is the uh, provisioner for storage. I'm just calling it provisioner, but to make sure that we are talking here of the Kubernetes ability to add storage to the pods or the containers, because you have a pod, you have a container, and you add application to it, you configure the images, you have uh, the config drives sometimes you use. So this is one where you can utilize the storage. So storage here, obviously you can have a local storage, you can have external storage, either way to the pod, because our point of contact is always going to be the pod. Pod is the unit of scheduling or unit of work, as we call in Kubernetes. And pod has containers, and containers you can attach any volume or detach any volume. How do you do? Because Obviously, we are looking at persistence because, uh, as I said in the last time, uh, if you do imperatively, that means you do through command line, kubelet, and all that. It's run to completion. Basically, it means that you run the pod, and once the job is done, it will just quit on you, and it will disappear. But if you don't want, because they are mortals, they have to be made immortal. How do you make them immortal? The one way is to do the service. So service stabilizes the pod because pods come and go, their IP changes, but the functions have to be maintained. Service cannot be, service should not be disturbed because the pod went down. It should be not be apparent to it that, hey, the other pod has been instantiated and it is serving. It doesn't know which pod serves as long as it serves. So to bring the stability, we discussed that service is the deployment model. So service is a service, capital service is a unique way of, it's an abstraction that uses different control loops to do um, the instantiation of the pods. So if I say I want two pods, it will do you two pods, and desired state is two pod, whereas only one pod is running, other pod failed, then that pod will be replaced because it is mortal, it is replaced. They are not immortal. So basically another pod will be instantiated by the control loop, and the API, through the API will notice that because kubelet tells it, hey, you told me two pod, one failed, that's it. It will not do anything until it is told that, hey, go run another one. And that the scheduler has to figure out where to pick up from, what the position is, or what's the uh, location where the node is available. It has got its own algorithms which it ranks, like your search algorithm in the um, Google, etc. It ranks that which node is most capable, and highest ranking uh, pod it will enable depending on the resource requirements. So this is what happens. So in this case, now we are talking of volume. So same way, volume has to be um, created, volume has to be attached. So there is something called as PV, which is permanent volume, or persistent volume, sorry. And the persistent volume have to be claimed. So you can create a persistent volume, it has to be claimed by somebody, some process, and they have to be, these are required for stateful sets, in the sense that whenever you have, see, wherever your parts are stateless, the applications that run in the pod may be stateful, but that cannot maintain because they are run to completion, so they die. So you need to maintain the state somewhere. The configuration states are maintained in the HCDB, HCD, which is the database key value pair in the control plane. But what happens to other, like if I have an image and I have that image requires a specific application configuration. Okay, I have the uh, what you call config. Uh, I have the um, uh, configuration which is stored in the uh, configuration which is provided to it through config map. So if there is a config map, it can provide as part of the image while booting the image. That's one way. The other way is to, you can save it in a persistent volume, and you can attach that volume so that when you initialize at that time, you can mount that volume and then attach it. But to do that, you need a volume. Volume is external. Volume doesn't exist either here. Volume is external. So anything that is, anything storage that is provided to Kubernetes is always a volume. So volume is a general term called volume. Okay, volume can be connected to iSCSI, or volume can be connected to uh, uh, some other interface. It doesn't care as long as the volume is available to you, persistent volume, where you can preserve the data, and that can be claimed through the persistent volume claim. So you have to create a claim, attach a persistent volume to a physical volume, mount it, and then stateful set is what manages this. We don't manage imperatively. As I said earlier, if you manage through kubectl, which is the command line utility tool, if you use through that, then whatever you do will be lost immediately. It will not persist. That means you need some stateful sets as a service. Service stabilizes the entire thing. So basically, for a stable uh, s- API to be used, you need to have attached to the pod whatever persistent volume claim you make to stick to it through the stateful state. So that if even if it fails, stateful set will re run it, and you will be able to uh, use that storage. There are storage provisioners, they are called. There are plenty of them. Now you can have object storage, you can have a file storage, you can have block storage, you can have any of these, NFS including. So you can see here list of volume plugins are there available. You can choose and pick and choose whatever you want. But we will focus today on what you call the storage script, because storage scripts enables any of these uh, selected plugins to be usable. So let me go to the CSI, which is our key. So we are talking here about CSI. So you have a storage provider, which we saw that there are many, like NFS. PD is the Google permanent disk or persistent disk, and EBS is the elastic block storage. Cinder S3. You can create volumes from any of the providers, storage providers. But the secret to success is using CSI. Kubernetes uses CSI. Like we are CR, what did our CRI do? CRI gave the network to CNI. Same way CRI passes on the uh, responsibility to CSI. It is CSI's responsibility, and this is where the CSI comes in. So once the CRI says calls this CSI and passes on, hey, get me a storage, I need a volume, I need to attach, give me what you have. Now that's the scenario. As I said earlier, we if we do anything imperatively, it is called a singleton. So so anything that we do as a singleton using the kubectl, that will not last persistently. So it's just for the understanding. But once you have understood, you can use the API and do automatically using the declarative higher level deployments. Like I said, stateful set being one of them. So let's look at the runtime now for the volume. How do you represent the storage in Kubernetes? So the storage is represented in Kubernetes as external storage or backend, and they are used, three terms that are used. One is persistent volume, another is persistent volume claim, and the third is storage class. So you can see on the diagram here, CSI has an interface to persistent volume, and the persistent volume is claimed by a claimer, and that is run through the storage class. So storage class is the standard way of enacting a PVC or creating a PVC, attaching a PVC to the CSI, and attaching the mounting the storage, external storage provider onto the CSI. So let's go through some examples to clarify. So assume we have a Kubernetes cluster and it runs on Google Cloud. Assume, okay? And suppose Google offers a persistent disk named say my G drive of 10 gigabyte. So since we have got the 10 gigabyte my Google Drive, my G drive, the way we can create a Google uh, Kubernetes engine pv.yaml. So we create a file called gke-pv.yaml, which contains some of the elements like API version is v1, kind. Kind is the term which is used for anything. It could be for pod, it could be for any specs you want. So in this case, we are talking of a persistent volume object. In Kubernetes, everything is an object. And we are talking of persistent volume object, and name metadata we associate with this PV1, let's say. And the specification is the desired state. And desired state is we need to have an access mode, which is read write once. So basically we want a persistent volume PV1 whose access method is RWO, which is read write once. And then the storage class name is the nothing but the it's a object uh, um, test. We are just trying to test it. So let's call it class name as test. The capacity is described that in the specification, our desired goal is to have a 10 gig uh, storage, and the replication policy is retain. So either you can delete or retain. Retain means if it gets disconnected or the something happens to the pod, you still retain what exists in the volume. It doesn't disappear. That's the reason we need to retain, and retain is a good choice for us, not delete. As soon as it goes up, if we delete, then there is no difference between a PV persistent volume and not having a persistent volume. So retain is one of the specs for it. And so the name now persistent disk is one PD, which is the my G drive. So our GKE PV.yaml contains a GCE persistent disk whose name is my G drive. So creating and viewing a PV. So what do? You use a command line. I'm using because we are trying to understand how it can be done. This is a imperative of doing however, but let's do it. Assume that we have a kubectl, a command line utility, where we can say apply -f and feed into it the GKE pv.yaml, which which we created earlier. You can see here. And if we give these specs, and then that once you have spec, then you will be able to run this. And so it creates a persistent volume called PV1 based on this utility command, asking the file to be fed to the kubectl utility, which applies it and creates the volume. Once it creates the volume, if you can use the kubectl command and say get PV1, it can tell you that, hey, name of the, I have got something called PV1, which is a 10 gig, and it's a mode is read write once, and it has got a reclamation policy of retain, and the status is it is available, and storage class of it is test. Now that we have read write once storage available, let's claim it. So the question is, uh, kubectl says this is available, but who is going to claim it now? So somebody has to claim. So we have to create another YAML file, and let's call this as gke-pvc.yaml. The earlier one was gke-pv.yaml. This is pvc.yaml. So we are creating a persistent volume claim. API version is 1. Kind is persistent volume claim. Metadata is again PVC1. Access mode is again same, read write once. And then storage class name is test again. And resource is request and storage of 10 gigabyte. So what is the resource you are requesting? That is what you have to say. So we are asking a storage of 10 gig. So now once validated, the PV1 and PVC1 are consistent. Basically, you can't have a PVC something and PV something. Basically, storage class should be same. If you are asking read write once, it should be read write once. If you are asking 10 gig, it cannot be less than 10 gig. So you cannot make a claim on a 10 gig or 12 gig. That's what I mean. So that means somebody has to validate that, hey, you asked for 10 gig and you asked for a RWO mode, and you have something which is there. So what kubectl apply when it is calling the PVC? First thing is validates, okay, this is all correct, everything requested, and they are not in odd, asking for more when it doesn't exist kind of thing. But you can ask less, that's not a problem. But all those it will validate. Once it is validated, then it will assign. So once it assigns, you will see that persistent volume claim PVC1 is created. And if you check with the kubectl get the PVC1, it will tell you that, hey, PVC1 has been created. It is bound to PV1. You can see here binding. So that means when you have a PVC and a PV, in this case, it is PVC1 and PV1, they are bound and they are created by storage class. So that means the binding is important. So if you go back to, this is singleton method, but just to verify, we had started saying that if I have a, PV and PVC using SC, I can do the entire creation. so that somebody wanting to use can use, call the CSI and say, hey, give me this PVC and give me that, mount that and give it to me. So it is not mounted yet, but you know that you have created a PV, you have created a PVC. Binding between these two is done by some, it was done by kubectl for us, but it will be done by the storage class, which will be run automatically. In this case, it is run manually, but these three persistent volume subsystem has created a PVC and a PV and bound them. And now somebody with a CSI call can connect to and mount it to a physical storage, external storage. If I have a NFS, I can just mount it and say, hey, connect this with the PVC, and the PVC is satisfied. And that's what it is. So what I wanted to go further was here, creating PVC is done, attaching, detaching volume is done. Now you can implement the uh, storage class. So what we saw is now you can use singleton as simple example as part of development. So basically we are trying to now depict, we have created PVC, we have created PV. How do I now connect them to the external storage? So attaching, detaching volume to the pod is the key. So to attach a pod, you will create one more YAML file or a descriptor file, which will have again same, the kind is pod. So basically we are saying that my object pod needs PV and PVC to use. So you have got the name of the wall pod. So metadata we have associated with that is called wall pod. And the spec is always going to be the desired state. Desired state is volume name of the volume. I'm going to give data, and I want to use the uh, persistent volume claim, and I want the containers within that to be called as Ubuntu uh, container, and I want the image to be pulled called Ubuntu latest. And the command, obviously, at the end of it, I want that it should execute a command bin bash with a container, sleep for 60 minutes. That means what it will have, we need to occur for 60 minutes, and it will mount the volume, and the volume is slash data, and the name of the volume is data. So it will mount on slash data, the volume data, by running this script. So attaching the volume, this is only attaching the volume. I'm not talking detaching, but let's talk attaching the volume. So now we will say this name of this file was wallpod.yaml. So kubectl apply -f wallpod.yaml. This will allow the wallpod to be created, and you can look at the description, either get or you can do describe, and it will show the details of the pod, like um, we saw previously, right? For kubectl, describe or get gives you the, actually describe pod gives you the entire description, huge. I have not noted here, I just kept it as it is. So basically what is the implementing of storage class? Create your K8 cluster with storage backend, ensure that plugin for storage backend is available. So what we did up to here was all singleton way. Singleton, that is, we are using run to completion. But if we don't want, we want to maintain the service or the volume, retain the volume, then we have to do the stateful set. For any uh, volume, you must use the stateful set services, not deployment. The stateful set is one, a special one. So you got similarly various services. So the stateful set services you implement, what it does, it the storage class basically has to do all this automatically, not manually. It will create you. So you have a Kubernetes cluster with storage backend, then you ensure that plugin for the storage backend is available, and create a storage class object, create a PVC object, and then deploy the pod, use the volume name based on the PVC. Note, this workflow never states where is PV, because storage class creates PV dynamically. So storage class has the capability to create a PV dynamically. And once it is created, then it will allocate the PVC and complete the storage. So now let me go to what is the production level implementation of storage classes. So what you saw is storage classes. And in the storage class, we saw that this is the storage class you can see here, right? So Kubernetes is all bunch of storages, bunch of objects, and it includes the deployment, daemon sets, pods, services, storage for the PVC and PV and PVC. You can have cluster role, namespace, config name. So what exactly I am trying to do here is to uh, provide to you kubectl as a uh, agent, and that agent can talk to Kubernetes API, and for the storage cluster, it can create a storage pool, storage objects, file store, etc. So depending on your external driver, if it is NFS, it's a file driver. If it is a Ceph, then it is a combination driver. If it is a Cinder, then it is a what you call block storage. If it's a EBS, so depending on who is hosting your Kubernetes, you have a kubelet, and you can use the kubelet through the Kubernetes API to create an operator. Example, Ceph. Ceph is an object store, very popular, which can provide you multiple uh, devices like Rados block devices. It can provide you Ceph file system. So you can have various kinds of external storage available. This is uh, production level. So uh, what we see here is we can have different APIs for commercial products, and that is a Rook. Rook is a graduated project which supports ready management for file, block storage, and object storage. So what you see here is a Rook as one of the production level, because we are talking about the Soda, and Soda involves something to do with file storage, block storage, object storage, and obviously uh, the infrastructure portion touches the Kubernetes and the OpenStack. And the lower level, obviously, we have the CRI, CSI, and CNI. So I just wanted to make sure that we include this to complete. And I think the other portion which you see here, there is a operator for Ceph. Operator is nothing but a automation required to do specifics to the uh, operation of particular uh, storage or network or compute or whatever. So uh, operator is a way to automate using the Helm packaging, and it has got the charts and all this. So all we do is we combine all this together to ensure that we can complete the storage for a commercial product like Rook. Our Rook is a open source, but it can support any external storage. They are out of tree, they call it. So that's why the CSI has been introduced to make sure that every provider can do their provisioning through their plugins. So our goal was to make sure that we um, include everything. And so I have included the CSI specs, Rook as a cloud native storage, which requires Helm as an operator. So these are the minimum requirement. So I think with that, I will be completing the recording for session 2. And I think I am going to, at this time, uh, stop recording.